Okay, The Collector. I actually saw this one when it first came out in theaters, and I really wasn't a huge fan of it, but somebody requested me to review it for my Horror-athon, so I decided to actually rent it through Netflix. Netflix actually has an alternate ending as one of the special features. There's a scene where Arkin leaves the house, and he looks back, and that's when he sees the little girl and the killer, and then he goes back to the house. The alternate ending is him leaving the house, giving the Austin salute, and then walking away, which would have made the movie like an hour long. Okay, the premise is actually fairly simple. There's a character called Arkin who is an ex-con who is working who's kind of working like as a kind of like a carpenter at the house of a jewelry broker. His ex-wife needs money to pay off her loan shark. So he decides, you know what, I want to break into this guy's house and steal from him. He's, a wealthy jeweler. And while he's doing that, he runs afoul of the person referred to as the Collector, who essentially makes really elaborate and brutal traps to collect certain people. Some of these traps include, and are not limited to, a room full of bear traps, as well as Rube Goldberg style, just weird, crazy, like you could grab something and then all these tripwires are going to go off. And chances are you'll probably be dragged, thrown into a wall, thrown into a banister, and he does all other things too, like there's an acid floor, almost all the windows are booby trapped with some sort of, almost like cleaving devices, razor blades, razor wires, the room full of fish hooks. Even after going, because the guy gets one caught like in his eyelid, which is just over the top. Because anything with the eyes and a fish hook is just... I've had my foot caught on a fish hook before, and it's a whole different level of pain, because you can't just pull it out, you have to like pull and scoop, and the hook being barbed, it is a whole different unique experience. Now, with this movie, the one thing I really consider that I liked about it is it's got pretty decent pacing, that you have a very small crew when it comes to people, and there's definitely a level of brutality to this. Like sewing someone's mouth shut, burning somebody with acid, cutting somebody and then putting like a jar full of roaches that you're letting on fire so they kind of chew at the flesh. Those things are done fairly well, and they're done realistically enough. What makes it super non-realistic is the amount of traps this person would have to set up in literally a couple of hours. That's gotta be the one thing that I really didn't like about it. This is also from the makers of Saw and stuff like that, so I understand that. But when it came to Saw, he had like months to plan things. This guy, while he was an exterminator at the house, you probably would have noticed if somebody was filling a room full of razor wires, or if somebody all of a sudden filled your kitchen with bear traps, or if like your daughter's room all of a sudden had a floor covered in acid. These things would actually take a decent amount of time to set up, and they're almost seem to be set up almost instantaneously. Then, of course, the Collector himself, while trying to give that air of believability, also appears to have like superhuman levels of endurance and durability to him. Those are my one big gripes about this movie. If you can take away those things and really divorce yourself from, it would take an awful lot of time to put those many nails into the stairs facing upward. It would take a long time to get that many bear traps into a room, or do razor wire crisscrossing. That would take a while, or to hang that many things of fish with those many different levels. Now, those things would take an unforgivably long amount of time, especially since the broker, his wife, his two daughters were planning on leaving on a weekend trip, and then pretty much on the exact same day they had a bunch of contractors there who then all left, and that's when Arkin had to go rob the house. So if you can divorce yourself from those inaccuracies, since it would take a huge amount of time, unless of course there are other collectors, which probably would have been a really unique twist had there been like a second person involved to help do these things. They have mentioned they are working on a sequel, so maybe the sequel will shed either some light on that, or it'll be entirely different from the previous one. So essentially, the Collector wants a specific person, captures them, puts them inside a box, and then uses that person as bait for the next person. Why? Think about it. If you were to go home and there's a safe sitting in your room, the safe is, screaming, you go to that safe, your attention is entirely focused on that, and then someone comes from behind you and attacks you. And of course, the collector has no dialogue, you never see his face. So he's doing this almost entirely randomly, but he has a really huge, elaborate game plan planned out. What stopped this movie from really, really being good is that some of the traps were so overly elaborate you knew somebody couldn't set that up in like a really fast fashion. This would take lots of time and lots of gear, and it would have been really hard when a family was getting ready to leave on a trip. Covering the floor in acid alone would definitely have taken some time. Let alone all the razor blade traps and the razor wire traps. And converting a chandelier into having a bunch of dangling knives and a nail wall with enough tension on a cable to throw somebody into it. There's a lot of things that would have taken a really, really long amount of time to set up. And they seem to almost like randomly appear. I was reading someone else's review and they mentioned this has been a phenomenal video game. So, The Collector, it's a decent movie as long as you go in there and going, it's just a horror movie, and don't try to throw in any sort of conceivable ideas of physics and the amount of time it would take to set up that elaborate of a trap.